The silverware clinked as my daughter-in-law mocked me across the table, her voice sharp and sweet. Still, I traced the rim of my water glass, letting their laughter pass over me like smoke. As the waiter arrived, check in hand, I watched his eyes. Quiet, careful, deliberate. While she adjusted her gold bracelet, he leaned in and said, "The bill's under your name, ma'am." The same spoon she'd just stirred her wine with paused midair, her smile faltering without sound. That's when I looked at my son and said, "She does like to take charge." All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The table gleamed beneath the chandelier like a stage set for civility. Silver reflected candlelight, glasses chimed faintly, and beneath the chatter floated the scent of rosemary bread and lemon butter. Caroline sat at the far end, her end, once. Now it was Natalie's voice that filled the air, lilting and polished, practiced for audiences that always applauded. Magnolia Row Bistro had been Natalie's choice, of course. Something elegant, she'd said over the phone, the way people say, something appropriate, when they mean, something expensive. Caroline had agreed with a nod she didn't bother to disguise as enthusiasm. The Whitmores liked appearances, and she'd learned long ago that silence cost less than explanation. The waiter poured water, the kind that came in glass bottles with foreign lettering. Caroline thanked him quietly. At 74, her politeness was as ingrained as her posture. Across from her, Evan shifted in his seat, scrolling idly through the wine list as if it contained a secret exit. His hair was thinning, his voice thinner still whenever his wife spoke. Natalie took the list from his hands. "Oh, sweetheart, you wouldn't know a decent Cabernet if it bit you." She flashed the waiter a smile that landed somewhere between charm and command. "Let's do the Chateau Margaux, the 2014. The sommelier raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Excellent choice, ma'am." Caroline studied the candle wicks flicker. $80 a glass. She wondered how much of that went to fuel a woman's need to prove she could. Dinner arrived slow, like theater acts between applause. Natalie narrated every bite, every story, every triumph. The new curtains, the charity brunch, the friend who accidentally mentioned her in the Herald's Society column. Caroline smiled when expected. The chicken piccata was perfectly tart, the pasta hand-cut, the portions small enough to feel exclusive. She chewed and listened, cataloging each word the way she once shelved books, carefully, alphabetically, by truth. Lena, seated 2 places down, watched her grandmother more than she spoke. The girl's eyes darted between her mother's animated gestures and Caroline's still hands. When the laughter swelled, Lena's gaze softened in apology, but she didn't speak. 23 was an age for self-preservation, not defiance. Dessert came with an unnecessary flourish, a chocolate soufflé split for the table, smoke curling from its center like a secret being released. Natalie clasped her hands dramatically. "Oh, let's celebrate something, shall we? Life's too short not to toast." "To what?" Evan asked, uncertain whether enthusiasm was required. "To family," she declared, "to Caroline's health, and to our good fortune." The glasses lifted. Crystal touched crystal. Caroline's water glass stayed where it was. Then it came, light as gossip, cruel as truth. Natalie leaned back in her chair, her laugh pitched for the whole table. "If Grandma were paying, we'd be eating from coupons." The laughter followed obediently. Even Evan chuckled, a reflex more than betrayal. Lena's smile collapsed before it fully formed. The sound filled the space like cheap perfume, lingering too long. Caroline didn't move. Her fork rested neatly on the edge of her plate, her hands folded beside it. She looked at her water glass, clear, unbothered, self-contained. Then she lifted her eyes to the waiter standing discreetly by the column. Their gazes met for a single, steady second. "Excuse me?" she said softly. "Could you bring the check, please?" The waiter blinked, uncertain. "Of course, ma'am." Natalie waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, don't worry, I'll handle it. Wouldn't want to dent the retirement savings." Carolyn offered a small, polite smile, the kind that said nothing and promised everything. "I wouldn't dream of stopping you." The table shifted in energy, the humor faltering. Evan's laughter thinned into a cough. Lena looked down at her plate. Only Natalie still smiled, unaware that her performance had already ended. The waiter returned with the folded leather folio and placed it before Caroline. She slid it down the table toward Natalie with a precise, almost delicate motion. "For the hostess," she said. The moment hung there, sharp and silent. The kind of silence that made the chandeliers hum. Caroline lifted her glass again, not to drink, but to watch the ripples distort her reflection. Behind that shimmer, Natalie's face changed, just slightly, as she opened the bill. Her laughter didn't come back. The bistro's music had quieted to a murmur, something smooth and forgettable. The kind of melody that tried to fill spaces words no longer could. Natalie's manicured fingers hovered over the check as though it might bite. The waiter stood by with the perfect professional smile, the one trained to weather awkward family scenes without blinking. She flipped the folio open. A single credit card glinted beneath the paper slip. Her card. Platinum, engraved, undeniable. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter from nearby tables only made the silence at theirs heavier. "Wait," she began, laugh-tinged and brittle. That's not mine." The waiter inclined his head slightly, the kind of bow that meant he'd done this dance before. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's the card we have on file from your reservation this evening." Caroline took a slow sip of her water, unhurried. The rim of the glass caught the candlelight. "You insisted on the wine," she said quietly, her tone almost kind. "I thought you'd like the privilege." Lena's fork slipped, clattering against her plate. Evan reached for his napkin, folding and refolding, eyes fixed on a stain that wasn't there. Natalie's laugh faltered into a nervous exhale. "That's, well, surely we can split it." Caroline looked up then, eyes steady and unreadable. "Oh, I wouldn't dream of that. You've been so generous tonight. It wouldn't feel right to interfere." Tension sliced through the table like an invisible wire. The waiter remained still, polite, but unyielding. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am," he murmured, pen poised. Natalie fumbled for her purse. The motion was jerky, uncoordinated, the way grace deserts someone caught unprepared. She pulled out a sleek wallet, tugged the card free, and pressed it down on the leather folio. "Fine," she muttered, her voice thin. "If it's that important to you." Caroline smiled faintly. "Not important, just accurate." The pen scratched against paper, a sound too loud for how soft it was. The waiter glanced at the slip, then at Caroline. One more quiet acknowledgement, and stepped away. For the rest of the meal, the conversation didn't recover. Evan tried twice, bringing up Lena's new job search and the weather, but both died before reaching the center of the table. The soufflé wilted, untouched. When the check returned, Natalie signed it quickly, almost violently, then shoved the folder closed as though the act itself might erase what had just happened. Caroline reached for her purse, not to pay, but to pull out her small worn notebook. She wrote something down, the movement deliberate, and tucked it back inside. "What's that?" Evan asked, voice tentative. "Just a reminder," she said softly, "to water the hydrangeas when I get home." Lena blinked, confused. Natalie rolled her eyes, eager for control. "Oh, for heaven's sake, it's not that serious." Caroline met her gaze. "No," she agreed. "It's not serious. It's only final." The waiter returned one last time, his hands folded neatly before him. Thank you for dining with us, he said, voice perfectly neutral. Mrs. Whitmore, we hope to see you again soon. Natalie froze. Which one? He smiled without answering. Have a pleasant evening. Outside, the night air was cool and salted from the harbor. The streetlights threw soft halos across the cobblestone walk. Caroline walked ahead, her steps measured, steady. She didn't wait for Evan or Lena. The click of her low heels echoed, certain and light, against the stones. By the time she reached her car, a silver sedan that still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the tightness in her chest had shifted. Not gone, just organized. At home, the Whitmore house looked as pristine as ever. Magnolia branches brushed the porch railing, and the faint hum of the outdoor fountain filled the air with a kind of ornamental peace. Caroline unlocked the front door, slipped inside, and turned on only one lamp. The dining room still held traces of last week's book club. Half a candle, a folded napkin, a faint ring on the wood she hadn't yet buffed out. She crossed to her bedroom, kneeling before the cedar chest at the foot of her bed. The hinges creaked softly when she opened it. Inside were neat stacks of labeled folders, each one handwritten in her tidy librarian's script. She pulled one free, cream-colored, marked Whitmore Trust Primary Deed. She laid it on the bedspread, ran her fingers over the embossed stamp, and exhaled once. Long, even, deliberate. The phone rang. She didn't rush to answer. The old rotary made its second and third ring before she picked it up. Did it finally happen? Came Diana's voice, warm and knowing, like someone who had been waiting at the end of a long joke. Carolyn smiled to herself. Oh, she said, glancing at the folder. It happened. Morning came soft and golden through the lace curtains, brushing against Caroline's neatly made bed. The folder from last night still sat where she'd left it, a pale rectangle against the quilt. Quiet, patient, unblinking. She rose without hesitation, her body moving through habit. Slippers, robe, the click of the lamp. Then she turned to the chest again. Her hands didn't tremble when she opened the folder. Inside were papers crisp from disuse, copies of deeds, notarized signatures, the trust agreement printed on thick bond paper. Her name sat at the top, underlined in blue ink, Caroline Whitmore, trustee. Beneath that, in smaller type, Revocable Living Trust, established 2015. She had drafted it after Evan and Natalie's 10th anniversary, when they'd insisted the family home should reflect their stewardship. Natalie's words, all honey and implication. Caroline had smiled, given them the illusion of co-ownership. Future residents, she'd called it. She let them redecorate, repaint, plant their curated gardens. She even let them believe the deed had changed hands. But it never had. Her finger traced the embossed notary seal. The paper had outlasted every argument, every polite dinner, every brittle laugh. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, another relic that rarely saw life before noon. A text from Lena. Sorry about tonight, I should have said something. Caroline read it twice, thumb hovering over the screen. Then she typed back 3 words that felt measured, not cold. You learn watching. She set the phone aside. There would be time for bridges later. For now, there was structure to restore. By 9:30, she was dressed. Gray slacks, white blouse, the soft cardigan she wore to the library board meetings. Her reflection in the mirror looked unbothered, but her eyes had a steadiness she hadn't seen in years. The kind that knew precisely where the signatures lived and what they meant. The folder went into her leather satchel, the same one she used when she'd taught research workshops. A librarian's armor. Organized, discreet, definitive. At the kitchen table, the clock ticked loud enough to fill the quiet. She dialed Diana's number from memory. Her friend answered on the second ring. I didn't sleep. Diana said without preamble. Kept replaying that woman's laugh in my head. You handled it like a bishop on a chessboard. I'm too old for checkers, Caroline replied dryly. Diana chuckled. So what now? Frame the receipt? Caroline looked toward the window. The hydrangeas outside were pale and heavy, nodding in the morning breeze. No. Paper's only powerful when it's filed properly. There was a pause, then Diana's tone sharpened. You ready to trigger the occupancy revocation? Caroline rested a hand on the folder. They disrespected the guest, she said quietly. I'll remove the hosts. Diana let out a low whistle. That's the Caroline I remember from the reference desk. Never raised her voice, but everyone knew when the conversation was over. I prefer documentation to confrontation, Caroline said, smiling faintly. One leaves better records. After they hung up, she made herself a small breakfast, black coffee, buttered toast, a slice of apple she didn't finish. The house felt different this morning. Not empty, exactly. More like it had exhaled. The doorbell rang at 10:15. A courier stood there, polite in a navy uniform, holding an envelope from Briarstone Law and Trust. Caroline signed for it, thanked him, and closed the door. Inside was the appointment confirmation. Mr. Francis Hale, Tuesday, 11 Wuis a.m. Estate review and amendments. She folded the paper neatly and placed it in her bag. Everything was moving the way paper moved when aligned. Clean edges, no resistance. Outside, a car pulled into the drive. Evan's sedan. She saw it through the window and stayed still. The door opened, closed. Footsteps approached, paused, retreated. He didn't knock. Just left something on the porch, a single grocery sack. Later, she opened the door and found it there. A bakery box with her favorite lemon bars tied in string. No note. His kind of apology. Quiet. Incomplete. She smiled anyway. There were still decent instincts buried beneath his compliance. She'd protect that too, in her own way. Caroline sat at her desk and opened the planner she'd kept since 1982. The neat cursive filled decades. Birthdays, doctor visits, even old library inventory dates. On today's line, she wrote, meeting, Hale, confirm trust clauses. Then, after a moment's thought, she added another note beneath it in smaller handwriting. Respect isn't inherited. It's revoked. The clock ticked on. Somewhere in the garden, the fountain kept its gentle rhythm. Caroline closed the planner, the sound of the leather cover snapping shut like punctuation. Her phone buzzed again. A second text from Lena. Grandma, I mean it. I'm sorry. I hate how Mom talks sometimes. It's not who I want to be. Caroline's hand softened around the device. She typed back slowly, each word deliberate. Then don't be her. Be better. It's not too late. The message sent. She turned off the phone and slipped it into the drawer beside her papers. In the quiet that followed, she opened the trust document once more, eyes tracing the line where her own name sat in ink, unchallenged. The legal title hadn't changed, not once in 10 years. And tomorrow, she thought, it would start to mean something again. The office of Briarstone Law and Trust smelled faintly of cedar and authority. Files lined the shelves in uniform precision, each one a quiet monument to someone's decisions. Mr. Francis Hale looked every bit the man who'd drafted half of Charleston's estate plans, steady, deliberate, and immune to charm. Caroline sat across from him, her satchel open, the folder laid out neatly between them. She had worn navy today instead of gray. Something about the color felt resolute. Hale adjusted his glasses, scanning the papers she'd brought. Everything is still active, he said, flipping through the pages. Revocable, in your full control. You wish to terminate their occupancy rights? Caroline's fingers rested lightly on the table. I do. He nodded, professional and unsurprised. You anticipated this possibility when you added the clause 10 years ago. I've always believed in contingency planning, she said. Some people call it pessimism. I call it record keeping. He smiled faintly, then slid a printed document across the desk. Here's the draft. Simple language, formal enough that no one can twist it into confusion. The heading read, Notice of Revocation of Occupancy, Whitmore, Residence. Below it, her signature line waited, blank but inevitable. Caroline took the pen. For a second, she watched the ink bead at its tip, the way decisions sometimes do before they fall. Then she signed. One steady line, no hesitation. Delivery by courier? Hale asked. Same day, she replied. He tapped the desk gently, a small gesture of closure. You've handled this with grace, Mrs. Whitmore. Most families turn these things into spectacles. She met his eyes. They already did. I'm just handling the cleanup. By mid-afternoon, a white sedan pulled into the circular drive of the Whitmore house. The courier stepped out, envelope in hand, wearing the calm indifference of someone who delivers both wedding invites and legal shocks. Natalie answered the door in a silk robe, coffee cup in one hand, irritation in the other. Can't you just leave it in the box? Requires signature, the courier said, holding out the digital pad. She signed, distracted, then tore open the envelope before the car had even backed out of the drive. Her eyes moved quickly over the first paragraph. Once, twice, and then stopped. The coffee cup hit the floor, shattering. What the hell is this? She whispered. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. Evan appeared in the doorway, half-buttoned shirt, concern already on his face. Nat, what happened? She shoved the letter at him. Read it. He read. His brow furrowed. This can't be right. She wouldn't. She already did. Natalie's voice rose, sharp enough to cut through the quiet. She's evicting us from the house. Evan blinked, the words catching somewhere between disbelief and guilt. There's got to be some misunderstanding. Mom wouldn't. Natalie turned on him. Stop pretending she's harmless. You saw her last night. You heard her. He looked down at the paper again. The bold print of Hale's letterhead. The cool, unarguable phrasing. Occupancy privileges terminated effective 30 days from receipt. Natalie's hands shook as she folded the notice, too roughly, leaving creases like fractures. I won't let her humiliate me. Not again. Maybe if we talk to her. I'm done talking. Her voice dropped, colder now. This is war. Across town, Caroline knelt in her garden. The soil was soft from last night's rain, the kind that left the air sweet and grounded. She pressed her hand gently around the base of a young camellia, tamping down the earth until it held firm. The fountain's quiet trickle kept time with her breathing. The phone inside rang once, then twice. She didn't move. Instead, she picked up the watering can and tipped it, letting the water run slow and deliberate over each root. When she finally stood, Diana was at the gate, balancing a pie dish in one hand and a folder under her arm. Cherry, she said, smiling. Thought you might like something tart to go with Triumph. Caroline wiped her hands on her gardening gloves. And the papers? 3 notarized copies, Diana said, tapping the folder. Mr. Hale sent them over. He said you sign like a woman who's been waiting for it. Caroline smiled faintly. I gave them a home, she said. They gave me mockery. Diana handed her the pie. And now? Caroline looked toward the house, its white columns bright against the magnolia trees, its windows reflecting nothing but sky. Now, she said quietly, I'm giving them freedom. The 2 women stood there a moment, the garden alive around them. Somewhere far off, a door slammed, the sound faint, but unmistakable. The movers came at dawn, their truck humming softly in the driveway while the street still held its mist. Caroline stood on the porch with a clipboard, her robe belted neatly, her eyes on the hydrangeas swaying in the early light. Each piece of furniture leaving the house felt like air returning to lungs that had been tight too long. "Just the downstairs," she told the foreman. "The rest can stay. It's theirs to figure out." Inside, boxes moved in quiet rhythm. The grandfather clock, the china she'd packed herself, the rocking chair that had been her mother's, all wrapped, labeled, and lifted away. When the door finally shut behind the last box, the house sounded too large, too hollow. Caroline locked it without looking back. Everpine Senior Community sat 12 minutes away, tucked behind a row of oaks whose leaves had just begun to bronze. The gates opened automatically, smooth and soundless. Inside, the buildings gleamed with white trim and wide porches, small worlds built for people who had earned calm. The manager, a kind man with silver hair and a crisp blazer, handed her the keys. "Unit 3B, Ms. Whitmore, Garden View, South Light. Everything's been processed through the trust account." "Good," Caroline said. "It's all meant to stay that way." When she stepped inside, the air smelled of lemon oil and new beginnings. The windows overlooked a courtyard blooming with tulips and camellias. No shared walls, no echo of footsteps not her own. Just quiet. Diana arrived a half-hour later, balancing a grocery bag and her irreverent grin. "You realize," she said, setting the bag on the counter, "you've just made Independence look like a spa retreat." Caroline smiled, folding the paper from around a framed photograph of Lena as a child. "I told you, I like order. This place understands that." They unpacked slowly, without hurry. Books first, then dishes, then the small framed maps from Caroline's travels. The kitchen clock went up last, ticking its familiar rhythm against a clean wall. "How's it feel?" Diana asked, leaning against the counter, hands dusted with the faint chalk of cardboard. Caroline turned to the window, where sunlight spilled over the tulip beds below. "Like a breath I've been holding for years." Her voice was even, but the edges of it trembled just slightly like the first breeze after a storm. The phone buzzed on the counter. Evan. The name lit the screen. Patient. Persistent. She stared at it, thumb hovering for a beat that could have been mercy. Then she pressed ignore. The silence that followed felt cleaner than any conversation could have. Diana watched her, then reached into the grocery bag. "Well, ignoring calls requires sustenance. Lemon bars. For the potluck tomorrow." Caroline blinked. "You remembered." "Please," Diana said. "You're predictable in the best ways." Together they baked, the air filling with sugar and citrus. Caroline measured carefully, her movements deliberate, methodical, the same way she had handled her trust, her life, her boundaries. When the timer chimed, she removed the tray and let it cool by the window. Later, as dusk softened the courtyard, she stood outside with a small plate of the lemon bars. Neighbors waved as they passed, gentle smiles, kind eyes, no one asking who owned what. Just people who understood the peace of closed doors and well-tended gardens. Inside, the radio hummed low with a Sinatra song. Caroline poured herself tea, then opened the mail that had been forwarded from the house. Among the bills and circulars was a single white envelope, Briarstone Law and Trust embossed at the top. She slid it open with a letter knife. Inside was a copy of Mr. Hale's filing confirmation, trust amendment recorded. Parties removed. Evan Whitmore, Natalie Whitmore. Below, his signature. Beneath that, hers. Already scanned, already accepted. Caroline folded the paper back into its envelope and set it under the lamp. For the first time in months, she felt her shoulders ease. She walked to the window again, tea in hand, watching the courtyard lights blink on one by one. Somewhere out there, a mocking laugh was probably echoing in an empty hallway, its sound collapsing into the kind of silence money can't buy back. She didn't need to hear it. The afternoon light stretched long and low across Everpine's courtyard, gilding the benches and catching the edges of Caroline's tea mug. She sat on her small patio, pruning a pot of lavender, when the knock came. Hesitant, uncertain, the sound of someone rehearsing courage on the other side of a door. She knew that knock before she even rose. When she opened it, Lena stood there clutching her purse strap like a rope. Her hair was wind-tossed, her eyes red-rimmed but steady. "Grandma," she said quietly. "Can I come in?" Caroline stepped aside. "Of course." Lena paused at the threshold, scanning the room. The space was bright but simple. Books neatly shelved, a vase of white tulips, the faint smell of lemon from the night before. "It's smaller than the house," she said, almost absent-mindedly. "It's the right size for the truth," Caroline replied. Lena's mouth twitched, somewhere between a smile and an apology. She sat at the small dining table, folding her hands tightly. "Mom's been unbearable. She keeps saying you're trying to punish her. That this is revenge." Caroline poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of her. "Your mother's very good at naming things she doesn't understand." "Then what is it?" Lena's question came out sharper than she meant, like something she'd been carrying too long. "Why now?" Caroline settled across from her, her posture graceful, unhurried. "Because this is what disrespect earns," she said simply. "Not revenge. Boundaries." Lena's eyes filled, the tears refusing to fall. "I should have said something that night." "You were quiet," Caroline said softly. "Quiet can be wise, but it shouldn't be permanent." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, heavy with recognition. Caroline reached for the leather binder that sat on the sideboard. She placed it between them, the metal rings glinting faintly in the light. "The trust," she said. "Updated." Lena hesitated before touching it, as though it might burn. "Am I in this?" "Yes." Caroline's tone didn't rise or fall. It was steady as paper being set in place. "But not without proof of value." Lena frowned. "Proof?" Caroline met her eyes. "You show up. You don't mock. You contribute to something larger than comfort." Lena stared at her, trying to understand. "That's not about money, is it?" Caroline's lips curved slightly. "No. It's about character. Money only amplifies what's already there." Lena's fingers brushed the cover of the binder, tracing the embossed letters of her grandmother's name. "Mom says you're cutting her out to make a point." "I'm cutting her out because she turned our name into a prop." Caroline rose and walked to the window, her voice calm but precise. Evan followed her lead. "I let it go for too long because silence felt easier than storms. But storms clear the air." Lena followed her gaze out the window. The tulips swayed in neat rows, the wind moving through them like agreement. "I don't want to be like them," Lena said finally. "I want to make something real." Caroline turned back to her. "Then start with honesty. What do you want truly?" Lena took a breath. "To earn back what I lost that night." Caroline's expression softened. "Then you already understand more than they do." She sat again, sliding a folder from the back of the binder. Inside was a single-page clause, printed in Hale's immaculate font. "Conditional beneficiary, Lena Whitmore." Below it, handwritten, was a note in blue ink. "Activation upon demonstration of independent merit." Lena looked up. "How do I show that?" "By showing up," Caroline said. "For your life, not just mine." They sat in silence again, the kind that didn't sting but settled. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint laughter of Everpine residents gathering for the evening walk. Lena closed the binder gently, almost reverently. "Mom's going to hate this." Caroline smiled. "She's hated smaller truths." Lena rose, uncertain whether to hug her or not. Caroline made the decision for her, one arm around her shoulder, brief but warm. When Lena stepped back, her eyes were brighter, steadier. "I'll prove it," she said. "I know," Caroline replied. "That's why you're here." Lena left with the binder tucked close to her chest, walking toward the courtyard path where the tulips caught the last of the light. Caroline watched her go, the door half open, the scent of lavender and lemon mingling in the air. The email came just after sunrise. Subject line, family meeting, 6 p.m. No greeting, no request. Just Natalie's usual certainty, typed into pixels. Caroline read it twice, stirring cream into her coffee until it turned the color of parchment. She could almost hear the tone, clipped, controlled, desperate to reassert authority. Evan's name was CC'd, of course. Lena's too. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that meant no. When she replied, her message was shorter than the subject line. "I won't be attending. My boundaries aren't up for discussion." She hit send, closed the laptop, and let the morning sunlight warm the back of her hands. By late morning, she was seated once again across from Mr. Hale's desk. The man had an aura of steady composure, oak in human form. Papers were stacked in symmetrical towers, his fountain pen precisely aligned with the legal pad beside it. "They've been calling?" he asked, voice neutral. "Several times," Caroline said. "They've discovered that control doesn't extend past dinner invitations." Hale nodded, flipping through a folder. "Your title control is ironclad, the trust is active, and all amendments were notarized properly. They have no legal recourse." Caroline exhaled softly, not relief exactly, but confirmation. Natalie has always preferred persuasion over paperwork. It's been her comfort, believing charm is binding. "Charm," Hale said, "expires faster than signatures." She allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. By the time 6 o'clock came, her phone lit up in rapid succession. Natalie's number, then Evan's, then a text from Lena. "She's furious. Says she'll call a lawyer. And the newspaper." Caroline set the phone face down on the counter. The Everpine dining room hummed softly in the background. Silverware, polite laughter, the smell of baked salmon and fresh rolls. She ate slowly, savoring her independence like a well-earned meal. When she returned to her apartment, the voicemail was waiting. Natalie's voice cracked through the speaker, brittle, with rage. "You think you can humiliate me? You think that house makes you powerful? I'll make sure everyone knows how manipulative you've been. The community, the Herald, everyone. You're not the victim here, Caroline." Caroline listened until the end, then pressed the phone to her chest for a long, measured breath. Finally, she deleted the message. Then she called Hale. "She's threatening to go public," she said. "I assumed she might," Hale replied evenly. "You'd be surprised how often pride forgets about paper trails." "What's your advice?" Hale paused. "If she speaks, you release documentation. Ownership records, payment ledgers, trust summaries, all signed by them. Facts are stubborn. Let them do the talking." Caroline smiled. "Then I'll publish the financial records." There was quiet admiration in Hale's voice. "You've turned this from a feud into a case study in restraint." "I was a librarian," she reminded him. "I've always believed in open access." That evening, Diana appeared at her door without calling, holding 2 mugs of tea and a knowing look. "I saw Natalie's little rant on social media," she said, setting the mugs down. "Full performance? Half-truths, bad lighting, and too much eyeliner. People love drama until paperwork ruins it." Caroline chuckled softly. "The town will have new gossip by Friday." "Exactly," Diana said. "You're not burning bridges. You're rebuilding alone. There's a difference." They sat together in the stillness. the faint hum of Everpine life in the background. Residents chatting on the lawn, the muted clink of dishes from the community kitchen. I don't need them to like me, Caroline said finally. I just need peace to be mine again. Diana lifted her mug. To peace. And to knowing where all the documents are filed. Caroline raised her own in reply. Later, after Diana left, Caroline checked her mailbox. Inside was a single envelope with Everpine's green crest embossed on the flap. Welcome letter, Resident Advisory Board invitation. She unfolded it slowly, scanning the neat script. Dear Mrs. Whitmore, your dedication to community organization has not gone unnoticed. We'd be honored to have you join our resident board for upcoming events and legacy planning initiatives. At the bottom, a handwritten note from the director. Your calm presence is exactly what this place needs. Caroline smiled, tucking the letter against her chest for a moment before pinning it to the corkboard above her desk. Outside, the magnolias rustled in the night air, their scent faint but steady. She poured herself another cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the world grow quiet. Her phone buzzed one last time, an unknown number. She didn't answer. The voicemail icon blinked red. By Monday morning, Charleston had already made up its mind, without knowing the facts. The Herald headline ran just above the fold. Family feud over historic Whitmore estate. Elder matriarch sparks legal storm. Below it, Natalie's photograph stared out from the page, her expression arranged somewhere between concern and triumph. The accompanying quote, "We're just worried she's not well enough to make these decisions," was calculated, rehearsed, and perfectly cruel. At Everpine, the paper arrived folded neatly on every breakfast table. By the time Caroline reached the dining room, whispers fluttered like birds across the room. Soft, curious, cautious. She took her coffee to go. In her apartment, she laid the paper flat on her counter, smoothing the edges with her palms. Her reflection stared back from the glossy print. Grainy, unflattering, cropped from an old community photo. The caption beneath it read, Caroline Whitmore, 74, longtime Charleston resident under scrutiny. She laughed once, a quiet, breathy sound that held more amusement than anger. Under scrutiny, she murmured. They make it sound like a criminal enterprise, not good filing. The phone rang. Mr. Hale. Have you seen it? He asked without preamble. I've seen worse typos in library newsletters, Caroline said dryly. Hale chuckled. You'll enjoy this then. The Herald requested the ownership records this morning. Since Natalie opened that door publicly, I've released everything. Purchase agreements, transfer statements, trust filings, all signed by her and Evan. They'll run the corrections tomorrow. Caroline could hear him flipping through papers, each page landing with a sound like order being restored. Facts, he said. Land harder than gossip. Let's hope they bruise appropriately, Caroline replied. By the next afternoon, the tone of Charleston's brunch chatter had shifted. At Magnolia Row, the same restaurant where the humiliation had begun, polite voices lowered over mimosas. She said, elder confusion. One woman whispered, but the documents are signed in her handwriting. Not a hint of confusion there. Another leaned in. I heard the attorney himself confirmed it. She was fully lucid and remarkably organized. Natalie's curated narrative was collapsing, and everyone could feel it. Her Instagram apology post, captioned, Family is complicated, I just want healing, only made it worse. The comments section bloomed with polite skepticism. Caroline didn't need to watch the fallout unfold. She had work to do. That evening, she sat at her small desk, editing a draft of Everpine's monthly newsletter. She'd volunteered 2 weeks earlier, mostly to keep her hands busy, but the director had since noticed her precision. The layout now gleamed with clear fonts, balanced columns, and corrected punctuation. A soft knock came at the door. Diana entered without waiting for permission, holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "Well," she said, setting one down, "you've officially dethroned Charleston's reigning hostess. Her credibility's in tatters. The article correction came out this morning. Front page, mind you. Turns out, signed documents are more photogenic than tears." Caroline arched an eyebrow. "And the brunch circuit?" "Divided. Half pity her, half call her delusional. A few are deleting old party photos just to be safe." Caroline smirked. "Selective history, the Charleston specialty." Diana sat beside her, lifting her glass in mock salute. "They underestimated the librarian. Bad math." Caroline tilted her head, amused. "I suppose they thought quiet meant harmless." "Quiet is strategy," Diana said. "You shelved their arrogance next to their receipts." The 2 women laughed softly, the sound of shared victory wrapped in civility. Later that week, a letter arrived on Everpine stationery. Heavy cream paper, embossed seal, formal tone. Caroline opened it at her kitchen counter, glasses perched low on her nose. "Dear Mrs. Whitmore, your composure and clarity through recent events have not gone unnoticed. The Everpine Community Board would be honored if you'd join our upcoming panel, Legacy and Dignity, Preserving What Matters. Your perspective embodies both." Caroline read it twice, the faintest smile touching her lips. "Legacy and dignity," she repeated quietly. "Fitting." She placed the letter beside her tea, folding her hands as the sun slanted through the window. Outside, 2 sparrows hopped along the railing, bickering over crumbs. She watched them, calm, unshaken. Her phone buzzed once. A new message. From Lena. "Grandma, I just saw the panel invite. Mom's furious. She says you're turning this into a spectacle." Caroline typed back, her fingers slow but certain. "No spectacle. Just history told accurately for once." She set the phone down and looked again at the Herald correction lying on her table. Her name restored, her ownership affirmed, her dignity printed in black and white. The next morning began with the kind of clarity only winter sunlight can bring. Sharp, unforgiving, beautiful in its honesty. Caroline sat at her writing desk, a pen poised over a blank legal pad. The Everpine courtyard outside shimmered faintly with frost. She wrote slowly, deliberately. Amendment to the last will and testament of Caroline Whitmore. Her handwriting was as steady as the morning itself. Evan and Natalie's names appeared next, crossed out with a single, perfect line. She didn't linger. The stroke was clean, not spiteful, just final. By the time she reached Lena's section, her movements slowed. The girl's name looked softer on the page, as though even ink could recognize innocence reclaimed. Caroline added a clause in Hale's recommended phrasing. Beneficiary status conditional upon independent establishment of residence, income, and purpose for a period not less than 1 year. The words sounded clinical, but to Caroline, they meant something truer. Grow roots of your own before inheriting mine. When she finished, she rested her pen against the pad and glanced at a small photograph nearby. Lena, at 10 years old, reading in the old library wing, her feet barely touching the floor. Caroline smiled faintly. 1 year, she murmured. You'll earn it. By mid-afternoon, she was once again at Briarstone Law and Trust, seated across from Mr. Hale. His office always felt like order personified. Mahogany desk, muted walls, and the low hum of a grandfather clock marking time with authority. "You're certain?" he said, scanning the new provisions. "I'm thorough," Caroline corrected. Hale's lips twitched. "Of course. Removing Evan and Natalie entirely leaves the estate streamlined. You'll transfer the residual portion to the Charleston Public Libraries?" "Exactly 100,000, Caroline confirmed. "To the Literacy Development Fund. They were there when no one else was." Seems fitting to repay the silence that raised me. Hale nodded approvingly. I'll file the documents today. You'll receive confirmation within 48 hours. Caroline leaned back slightly. That house made them loud, Francis. But this will makes me final. The attorney's expression softened. Final, but not cruel. She smiled. Cruelty is noise. This is structure. When she returned to Everpine, the air smelled of cinnamon and pine. The recreation room had been decorated for the holiday tea she'd quietly organized, a small affair for 6 residents she'd grown fond of. No fanfare, no speeches, just lemon bars, hot cider, and unpretentious company. Diana arrived last, carrying a basket of sugar cookies shaped like magnolias. You're making every other 70-something here look unproductive, she teased, setting them down. I prefer the word consistent, Caroline said. The women gathered around the long table, laughter soft and genuine. There were no curated conversations, no social ladders to climb, just stories. One woman spoke about her late husband's tomato garden, another about learning to drive at 70. Caroline listened, smiling, occasionally pouring more cider into an empty cup. When the laughter quieted, Diana leaned close. I read the library announcement. They're naming a study room after you. Caroline looked up, startled. They are? Director called this morning, Diana said. She wanted to know what quote you'd like on the dedication plaque. Caroline thought for a moment. Something simple. Maybe. Knowledge outlives pride. Diana laughed softly. Perfect. They toasted with tea instead of champagne, the steam rising between them like quiet applause. That night, Caroline returned to her apartment, her mind calm but alert. She placed her signed will into the fireproof drawer beneath her desk, beside the trust binder and the Everpine welcome letter. The clock ticked on. She poured herself one last cup of tea, the kind of ritual that made endings dignified. Her phone buzzed once on the counter, an unknown number again. She almost ignored it until the voicemail alert chimed a few seconds later. Curiosity won. She pressed play. A pause, then Evan's voice. Soft, cracked, defeated. Mom, I just wanted you to know, she's not giving up. She's planning something else. Something legal. I thought you should hear it from me. The message ended. Caroline stood still, the faint hiss of the kettle filling the silence. Caroline let the voicemail hang in the air for a long moment, the soft hiss of the kettle fading into quiet. The phone screen glowed on the counter, Evan's name frozen in digital sympathy. Then, without hesitation, she pressed delete. The sound of the message vanishing, a faint click, felt cleaner than any conversation could. Her son's voice disappeared into data dust, and with it went the final thread that had once tied her peace to his indecision. The kettle clicked off. She poured herself another cup of tea, added no sugar, and stood by the window while steam drifted toward the glass. Below, the Everpine courtyard glimmered under faint moonlight, calm and self-contained. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a text. Lena, they're angry, but they're quieter now. Caroline smiled faintly. Of course they are. She typed back, Caroline, anger fades. So does relevance. A minute later, 3 dots appeared, pulsing as Lena typed. Then they vanished. No reply. Caroline didn't mind. Understanding took time. She'd given her granddaughter the gift of patience. She set her mug down and turned on the small lamp by her desk. The amber light fell across her papers, trust updates, copies of the library donation, Hale's most recent letter confirming the amendment filings. Everything in its proper order, everything where it belonged. The next morning, the Everpine director stopped her in the hallway. Mrs. Winslow was a woman built on kindness and coordination, her clipboard practically an extension of her arm. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, smiling, we've had a request. One of our residents, Mr. Flannery, is updating his estate plan and asked if we had anyone experienced with legal documentation. Mr. Hale recommended you by name. Caroline blinked. Did he? He said your attention to detail is methodical and incorruptible. Winslow grinned. Would you consider serving as liaison, just to help him navigate the paperwork? Caroline hesitated, then nodded. I'd be glad to. Wonderful, Winslow said. He's in 2A, former engineer. You'll like him. He's precise. When Winslow walked away, Caroline allowed herself a small, private laugh. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent a lifetime ensuring others respected structure, and now structure had come looking for her. Later that afternoon, Diana arrived with her usual flourish. No knock, just the click of the door and the scent of coffee cake. Please tell me you've seen the latest gossip, Diana said, setting down the bakery box. Natalie's doing interviews again, this time about how you manipulated the system. Half of Charleston thinks you're some kind of genteel crime lord. Caroline arched a brow. It's remarkable how noise sustains itself when there's nothing left to echo. Diana laughed. You've weaponized silence. Your quiet became their chaos. Caroline tilted her head. Or their mirror. Diana poured coffee and handed her a mug. Whatever you call it, you've turned endurance into art. Your silence became structure. Caroline smiled. Structure lasts longer than sound? They sat for a while, watching the sunlight move across the room. Diana told stories about her grandchildren, her bridge group, the resident who kept accidentally stealing napkins from the dining hall. The world, Caroline thought, had returned to proportion. When Diana left, Caroline stood for a long time in the doorway, watching the hallway lights dim to evening mode. Then she turned back toward the kitchen. The recipe card sat in the same drawer it always had, yellowed edges, her handwriting still tidy, the faint flour smudge in the corner. Pecan pie. Original, not too sweet. She hadn't baked it since the house, since Natalie's commentary on sugar being dated. But tonight, she wanted the smell of something familiar that hadn't been spoiled by memory. She measured, stirred, poured. The rhythm was its own meditation. When she pulled the pie from the oven, the crust glowed golden, the filling glossy and rich. Caroline placed it on the counter to cool, the scent spreading through her small apartment like warmth rediscovered. She cut one slice, sat at the table, and took a slow bite. It tasted like resolve, sweet but earned. Her phone buzzed once more. Another unknown number. She sighed, wiped her hands, and let it ring. Then she noticed the voicemail transcribe flashing briefly on screen. Mrs. Whitmore, this is Officer Kent from Charleston PD. There's been an incident at your old property. Please call us back when you can. The pie knife froze mid-air. The morning after the call from Charleston PD, Caroline did what she always did when the world tried to tilt. She made tea, straightened her papers, and waited for the facts. Hale called by noon. Small fire, he said. Kitchen damage, nothing structural. The officer said it started with a candle left burning. They found no one home. Caroline thanked him calmly, hung up, and stared out her window for a long while. The camellias swayed in a clean January wind. Some things, she thought, burned themselves out without intervention. That same afternoon, a new email arrived. This one from Lena. Grandma, I started at the Charleston Literacy Foundation today. They said I can help run the after-school reading group for kids. It's not paid, but I'll send updates. Just wanted you to know. Caroline read it 3 times. There was no plea, no apology, just motion. A quiet step toward earning what couldn't be given. She typed back only one line. That's the first deposit toward legacy. She didn't need to explain. Lena would understand. Over the next few weeks, the updates came like clockwork. Brief, unembellished, Ernest. 5 students today. One of them finished her first chapter book. We're running out of dictionaries. I found 3 at a thrift store. Do you remember the word for when a book feels like a window? I think that's how they feel when they read. Caroline replied sparingly, but always read every word. The messages became the punctuation of her days, each one a reminder that growth could sound humble, not loud. Meanwhile, Everpine had settled into its winter rhythm. Residents migrated between the library and the greenhouse, discussing weather, recipes, and the merits of crossword puzzles. Caroline joined the book club on a whim, part curiosity, part obligation to her new role as resident board member. The first meeting gathered in the lounge by the fireplace. 6 women, one worn copy of a novel, and enough tea to float conversation for hours. Diana slid into the seat beside her, smirking. "All right, genius. What's our inaugural read?" Caroline tapped the stack in front of her. "Wives Who Lost the Deed." Diana burst out laughing. "You're kidding." "Half." Caroline sipped her tea. It seemed appropriate. The room chuckled softly, unaware of the layers in her choice. The discussion moved easily after that, flowing between passages and anecdotes. Caroline listened more than she spoke. When she did, her voice carried the kind of weight that only stillness gives words. Later that night, she sat at her desk drafting a note to Hale. "Francis, please add a conditional living trust clause for Lena Whitmore. Activation pending community service completion, verified by organization director. No monetary advance prior to confirmation." His reply arrived within the hour. Efficient as always. "Understood. I'll prepare the addendum. Your granddaughter is building something quietly remarkable, Caroline." She smiled at the phrasing. Quietly remarkable. That would do. February crept in with soft rain and early blooms. The Everpine courtyard began to smell of soil and renewal. One evening, Caroline baked a loaf of banana bread for the staff and left it by the front desk with a small note. "Thank you for keeping the lights gentle at night." She no longer thought about Natalie's public outbursts or Evan's hesitant guilt. Even the house, what remained of it, had drifted into the background of her thoughts, a structure she'd once lived in but no longer inhabited emotionally. When she walked the halls now, other residents greeted her by name. Some asked for help reviewing their own wills or understanding their trusts. She always obliged, always with patience. Order, after all, was her quiet evangelism. Diana found her one afternoon, reading by the window as sunlight slanted through the blinds. "You've gone from librarian to legal sage," she said, grinning. Caroline looked up from her book. "Same skill set," she said, "just different shelves." They shared a laugh, the easy kind that comes when 2 people have survived the same kind of storms. That evening, Caroline checked her email before bed. A new message from Lena waited. "We're hosting a literacy fair next month. I'll be speaking. No family invited, it's for the students. But I wanted you to know I'm nervous. And proud. Mostly proud." Caroline rested a hand against the monitor as though touching the words could make them warmer. "Good," she whispered. "Be proud quietly. It lasts longer." Outside, rain tapped against the window. The courtyard lights flickered on, reflecting in the glass like tiny constellations. Her phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Hale. Addendum filed successfully. Effective immediately upon proof of service hours. Caroline exhaled, closing her laptop. Another clean line drawn, another story properly archived. Charleston in March carried a gentler light. Less gold, more silver. The city moved at half speed, as if remembering that grace took time. Caroline arrived early to the bistro on Market Street, choosing a small corner table near the window where the late afternoon sun fell in quiet squares across the floor. No crowds, no chatter. just the low hum of soft jazz and the scent of roasted tomatoes drifting from the kitchen. She ordered soup, cream of mushroom, served in a porcelain bowl that looked too delicate for real appetite, and waited. Lena arrived 5 minutes late, flushed from the walk, clutching her tote like armor. She wore no makeup, no performance. Just a navy sweater and eyes that had learned humility the hard way. "Grandma," she said softly, stopping just beside the table. Caroline rose. "Sit, dear. You look winded." "I didn't want to make you wait. I've waited longer for less." That broke the tension just enough. Lena smiled, small and nervous, and sat across from her. For a few moments they didn't speak. The waiter came and went. Soup was ladled, bread placed between them. The clink of spoons became a kind of rhythm. Two people relearning each other in silence. Finally, Lena set down her spoon. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began. "The house, Mom, the trust. I never saw what you built. I only saw what she claimed." Caroline's gaze lifted, calm but penetrating. "That's how you lose value, mistaking access for contribution." Lena looked down. "I did that too. I thought being close to something meant earning it. But working at the literacy center?" She hesitated, fingers twisting the napkin in her lap. "It's different. When you teach someone to read, it's not yours anymore. It belongs to them." Caroline's lips curved faintly. "That's how it should be." The soup cooled between them, but neither cared. The silence that followed was no longer awkward. It was earned. "I read your clause," Lena said after a moment, voice careful. "The one about the year of independence. I thought it was punishment at first. And now? Now I think it's trust in disguise." Caroline nodded once. "Exactly. I won't reward proximity. I'll honor growth." "You're showing me both." Lena's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I just wanted to say thank you for making me figure things out the hard way." "You'll remember it longer," Caroline said. The waiter returned quietly, offering refills. Lena ordered 2 teas, insisting before Caroline could object. When the bill came, she reached for it without hesitation. Caroline noticed the gesture, the steadiness, the quiet assumption of responsibility. The small things spoke loudest. "I've got this," Lena said. Caroline didn't stop her. She simply folded her napkin and placed it neatly beside her bowl. "All right," she said. "Let it be yours." Lena paid in cash, bills smoothed carefully on the table, like someone who had learned the value of exact change. When they stood, the light had softened into evening. Through the window, the street shimmered with the glow of early lamps. Caroline adjusted her scarf, and for a moment, neither woman moved to leave. "Can I walk you to your car?" Lena asked. Caroline smiled. "You can walk with me." They stepped outside together, the air cool but forgiving. The cobblestones glistened faintly from a morning drizzle. Halfway down the block, Caroline stopped. She turned to Lena, studying her face, the same Whitmore features, but softened by sincerity instead of entitlement. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She reached out, one hand resting gently on Lena's shoulder, the other pulling her into a brief, real embrace. Lena froze, then melted into it, breathing in the faint scent of lavender and lemon that clung to her grandmother's cardigan. When they parted, Caroline's eyes were steady. "You're doing the work," she said. "That's all I ever wanted." Lena nodded, her throat tight. "I know." They walked the rest of the way in silence. At the corner, they paused. 2 figures in twilight, the distance between them finally measured in understanding instead of inheritance. Carolyn watched her granddaughter cross the street toward her car, then turned back toward the bistro, where the lights glowed soft and forgiving. Spring ripened early that year. Charleston draped in azaleas, magnolia buds bursting like soft punctuation across the city. Caroline moved slower now, but with a purpose that made her presence feel inevitable. The day began at her desk, the same oak one she'd brought to Everpine months before. It held everything that mattered: her will, her trust, a stack of handwritten notes, and a fresh folder stamped in gold: the Whitmore Women's Housing Grant. She'd chosen the name carefully, not for vanity, but for permanence, for correction, for the kind of lineage built from integrity rather than entitlement. Diana sat opposite her, glasses perched halfway down her nose, reading the draft paperwork aloud. Mission statement: to provide housing assistance and financial literacy training for single women rebuilding stability and self-worth. She looked up. It's beautiful. Painfully specific, but beautiful. It should be specific, Caroline said. Broad goals give people room to forget what they're fighting for. Diana smiled, signing her witness line. You've turned indignation into infrastructure. Caroline smirked. I prefer policy to pity. The two women shared quiet laughter that only long friendship allows, the kind born from shared endurance and the satisfaction of watching the right people squirm. By mid-afternoon, they were at Briarstone Law and Trust again. Hale's office, as always, was a temple of order. Law books lined like soldiers, sunlight filtered through lace blinds, and a single green lamp illuminating precision itself. He looked over the foundation documents, nodding approvingly. This is ambitious, Mrs. Whitmore. Housing grants for women with dependents, structured oversight, direct mentorship. It's not just charity, it's architecture. Legacy is supposed to hold, Caroline replied, not collapse when sentiment fades. He flipped through the accompanying amendment to her will. 40% of the estate directed to the grant's endowment, the remaining allocations, library donation, personal provisions for Everpine's residents, remain unchanged. Correct, she said. And Lena? Hale asked. Caroline's expression softened. She'll serve as trustee when she turns 25, not before. Responsibility shouldn't arrive without maturity. Conditional activation, Hale murmured, reading the clause. Very prudent. She's learning what inheritance should mean, Caroline said. That it isn't owed, it's earned through stewardship. Hale signed the final line with his customary efficiency and passed her the pen. Then we make it official. Caroline took her time. Ink touched paper, deliberate, unwavering. The line she drew felt like the last sentence in a book that had taken her a lifetime to write. When she was done, Hale leaned back in his chair. You know, he said quietly, not many people your age create something that outlives both anger and affection. You've done both. She smiled faintly. I suppose librarians always hope the last chapter redeems the story. Later that week, the grant paperwork filed and accepted, Caroline and Diana walked the polished floors of the Charleston Public Library's East Wing. The building was quieter than she remembered. More screens, fewer whispers, but it still smelled faintly of paper and ambition. A small sign near the reading room door caught her eye. Whitmore. Reading room. Dedicated to the preservation of knowledge and dignity. Below it, the quote she'd chosen months earlier gleamed in engraved brass. Knowledge outlives pride. Caroline stood for a long moment, hand resting lightly against the plaque. It's strange, she said softly. You spend years holding your breath for respect, and then one day, it's etched into metal. Diana touched her arm gently. You've built something that can't be mocked. That's rarer than money. Caroline turned toward the windows, where light spilled across rows of books. Let the story be different for someone else's granddaughter, she said. Let her find a key instead of a gate. That night, Back at Everpine, she sat on her balcony with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the courtyard lamps blink on. A light breeze carried the scent of rain. Somewhere below, two residents argued good-naturedly about who'd overwatered the petunias. Her phone buzzed beside her. A new message from Lena. "Grandma, I saw the announcement about the housing grant. It's incredible. You did that for strangers?" Caroline typed slowly. "No, I did it for women who aren't strangers yet." Lena replied a few moments later. "Mom saw it too. She's angry again. Says you're trying to erase her." Caroline smiled faintly, setting the phone aside. "Not erase," she murmured to the night. "Just revise." The wind stirred the curtains. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled softly, the kind that promised cleansing, not destruction. Summer in Charleston arrived with its usual stubbornness, air heavy as syrup, the scent of salt and honeysuckle settling over everything. For the first time in years, the city felt quiet to Caroline, not because it was, but because she finally was. She sat on her balcony at Everpine, pruning a small pot of rosemary. The plant had grown dense, orderly, everything she respected in life. Inside, the faint hum of a ceiling fan kept rhythm with the soft music from her old radio, the kind with dials that still clicked. Below, the courtyard shimmered in heat. Residents drifted lazily between shade and conversation, moving like people who had nothing left to prove. Evan's updates came indirectly, through whispers, through Lena, through the small-town inevitability of gossip that traveled faster than remorse. He'd rented an apartment 2 neighborhoods down, a modest 2-bedroom with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. Something temporary, he'd told the landlord, though months had passed. He went to work, came home, and left the lights low. His neighbors said he was polite but withdrawn, the kind of man who apologized for taking up space. Natalie, meanwhile, had taken a job at a boutique on Broad Street. She greeted customers with the same rehearsed charm that once ruled dinner tables. No one mentioned the house. Not in interviews, not in idle chatter, not even in the soft columns of the Herald Society section where she used to appear. The Whitmore name had lost its currency in Charleston's polite circles, replaced by a silence people mistook for dignity. Caroline didn't correct them. Lena kept working. She sent emails every few weeks, short notes with photos attached, children holding books, community flyers she'd helped design, shelves she'd built for the literacy fair. Sometimes she met Diana for lunch at a quiet cafe halfway between the foundation office and Everpine. They ordered sandwiches, swapped stories, and, by silent agreement, never discussed Natalie. "She's steadier now," Diana would report afterward, usually with a knowing smile. "Reminds me of you." Caroline would laugh softly. "Then she's learning patience too late and gratitude just in time." Inside her apartment, life had become a study in contentment. The once empty walls now held framed postcards. New Orleans, Portland, a few from Lena's volunteer trips. There were no family portraits, no echoes of forced smiles. Every morning she watered her plants, wrote in her notebook, and read for 2 uninterrupted hours. Fiction, history, the occasional memoir of someone who mistook regret for wisdom. At night, she cooked for one and set the table anyway. Plate, fork, linen napkin, glass of water. Rituals were their own kind of faith. The phone rarely rang, and when it did, it was never who it used to be. And that, she found, was a kind of luxury. One humid afternoon, Diana arrived with a bag of peaches and a mischievous grin. "You've officially become Everpine's unofficial therapist," she announced. "3 residents told me you talked them out of rewriting their wills for ungrateful relatives." Caroline smiled. "I simply reminded them that forgiveness doesn't have to come with a key." Diana plucked a peach from the bag and leaned back in her chair. "You know, you've done something rare. You didn't just outlive the noise, you edited it. Caroline's laugh was quiet, genuine. They counted me out, she said, trimming another leaf from the rosemary. I counted my piece. That evening, as the sun sank over the marshes, Caroline sat with her tea and the latest letter from Lena. The literacy fair was a success. The kids raised enough to restock the reading room. I spoke for 10 minutes without notes. I think you'd be proud. Caroline folded the letter neatly, sliding it into a box labeled Legacy. I already am, she whispered. She took another sip of tea, her gaze drifting to the horizon. Fireflies flickered across the darkening air like scattered punctuation marks, light finding its way between sentences. Just as she began to close the balcony door for the night, her landline rang, a sound she hadn't heard in weeks. She hesitated, hand hovering over the receiver, half expecting Hale or Winslow. But when she answered, the voice that came through was neither calm nor familiar. Mrs. Whitmore, the man said quickly, breathless. This is Officer Kent. I'm sorry to bother you again, but the investigation at your old property has uncovered something you should see for yourself. We found documents. Not yours. Hers. The line crackled once, then went still. The evening was soft with the kind of warmth that made time seem forgiving. Everpine's courtyard had been strung with white lights. Nothing extravagant, just enough to turn the garden into a quiet celebration. Caroline stood at the center of it all, her linen dress pressed, her hair brushed into its familiar silver coil. It wasn't a gala. It wasn't even a party. It was a dinner, a final one, though no one but Caroline knew that for certain. 6 guests, handpicked. Diana, Mr. Hale, Mrs. Winslow, 2 Everpine neighbors, and Lena. The people who had earned their places not through blood or charm, but through presence. The table was laid beneath the magnolia tree, where the scent drifted down like memory. White plates, cloth napkins, the good silver she'd brought from the house. Not as relics, but as reminders. The food was simple. Roasted chicken, sweet potatoes, collard greens, and lemon bars for dessert. Real food, Diana said as she poured tea. The kind that doesn't apologize for being warm. Exactly the goal, Caroline replied, settling into her seat. We've all had enough meals that were about performance. Lena laughed lightly, brushing hair from her face. Mom used to say presentation is everything. Then it's no wonder she missed substance, Caroline said, not unkindly. The table chuckled, the kind of laughter that felt safe. For a while, they just ate. The sound of forks, quiet conversation, the faint music from a radio inside. An old Ella Fitzgerald song floating through the open windows. Caroline watched each face in turn. Diana's knowing grin, Hale's reserved contentment, Lena's composure that no longer tried to impress. Halfway through the meal, Caroline reached for her purse and drew out her checkbook. Leather-bound, well-worn, the same one she'd kept since her library days. I have one last signature left in me tonight, she said. Hale raised an eyebrow. Business at dinner? Closure, she corrected, and began to write. The check was smooth beneath her pen, the ink precise. When she tore it from the book, the sound was clean, final. She slid it across the table to Hale. Donation to the Whitmore Women's Housing Fund, she said. A personal contribution, not from the estate, from me. He nodded slowly, eyes softening. You're giving twice. Once in paper, once in intention. Caroline smiled faintly. Paper endures because intention fades. Lena looked at her grandmother then, her voice trembling slightly. You know, I wrote something. Then read it, Caroline said, folding her hands. Lena stood, smoothing the page in front of her. Her voice steadied with each word. Thank you, Grandma, for not letting the mockery be the final word, for teaching me that dignity isn't given by family or title. It's built quietly, one decision at a time. The table was still. Even Diana, who rarely let silence stay unbroken, stayed quiet. When Lena finished, Caroline rose and wrapped her arms around her. "You made this more than a correction," she whispered. "You made it a beginning." Lena pressed her face into her shoulder. "You gave me the blueprint." They parted, both smiling through the kind of quiet that carries its own applause. Diana lifted her teacup, the porcelain catching the light. "Here's to long memories," she said, "and quiet victories that echo louder than gossip ever could." "To that," Caroline agreed, raising her own. They drank tea instead of wine, but it felt like a toast all the same. As night deepened, lanterns flickered against the magnolia leaves. Conversations drifted to books, to recipes, to the small habits that made life tolerable. Hale offered to help clear plates. Diana refused to let him. Lena lingered, folding napkins with deliberate care, like she was memorizing the moment. When the last of them left, Caroline stood alone beneath the tree, her hand resting lightly on the empty chair beside her. The lights hummed above, swaying faintly in the evening breeze. She glanced toward the checkbook still open on the table, the faint imprint of her signature visible on the next blank page. One story ending, another already pressing through the paper. She smiled, small, content, knowing. Then she whispered the words that had begun everything, half to herself, half to the quiet Charleston night. At dinner, my daughter-in-law mocked me while everyone laughed. The waiter brought the bill in her name.